How about you? I'm Hank. Welcome to Hamiltonville Farm. In today's video, I want to share with you the lessons that I learned when I rented this bulldozer for a month. Hopefully it helps you. Hopefully it makes you think about some things before you rent your own dozer, and to see whether or not renting one versus hiring someone out, you know, do the comparisons and see which one's better for you. Now, you can't put a price tag on actually the fun that you'll have when you rent the bulldozer, but as far as strict numbers, maybe this will help you make a comparison before you rent one or before you consider hiring someone to do the work for you. Let me tell you about the 5 lessons that I learned. Okay, maybe 6 lessons that I learned when I rented this bulldozer. If you watched the video of the day where the bulldozer was delivered to the farm, I told you the price that it was. I told you that it costs $4,860 if my memory serves me correctly, like $4,800 and almost $5,000 to rent the bulldozer for the month of February. Now, this was 28 days, and they gave me 40 hours a week at 160 hours, and that's going to come into play here later on in the video, so make sure you stick around for that. But there's something that they don't tell you about, or there's some cost that you need to think about that maybe I had a passing thought on it, but I didn't really consider how much of a financial impact this was going to be when you rented the dozer. And that's this right here, fuel. I have 5 gallon jerry cans for my fuel. And so each time I filled up, it was $53, something like that. And I put about $250, $300 worth of fuel in it since I've had it. I was constantly going up there taking 5 gallon cans up to the service station and getting 25 gallons at a time. And so it's $53 a pop. And then 3 days later, I go get it, you know, $53 a pop or whatever. And so it got to be where I spent, you know, I was like, oh my goodness, I've got to have $250 in cash on me. And I'll say this, when we talk about the hours, remember I talked about they gave me 160 hours. I'm going to tell you how many hours I put on this dozer since I've had it. And you could probably get upwards up to $1,000 worth of fuel and DEF fluid while you're renting this piece of equipment, because I didn't put a lot of hours on this thing. So when you're renting it, make sure that you consider the cost of fuel that you're going to spend, and do you have access to that fuel. Now, if you have some type of fuel storage container on your farm or your property, then it might not be that big of a deal for you. But I didn't. I just had those jerry cans, so I had to shuttle back and forth getting fuel for it every other day or so. And it was, you know, you had to plan for that around your lunch breaks and things like that when you were actually working the dozer. So consider the fuel cost that goes along with the rental fee. And not only do you want to consider the fuel cost, there's other things that you need to have besides the dozer. So let's talk about the second lesson learned from renting this dozer. You really need to have another piece of equipment available. I have a Branson tractor on the property, so I was able to have that tractor available, ready in case something happened to the bulldozer. And it did happen. I got stuck. I got stuck like 9 times. It was crazy. And I'm going to talk more about why that's important here in a minute. But you know, here I am, I'm taking my dozer down into the woods, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to clear this piece of land off right quick. Take me a couple hours, I'll be done. Boom, I find a soft spot in the mud, and the next thing you know, my tracks are spinning. And I got this thing stuck probably 4 times, somewhere around in there. Now, luckily, I was able to get it out a few times on its own power, but there was a time where I needed a backhoe on my tractor to dig this thing out. A lot of that has to do with the experience of the operator. I get that, you know, not knowing how to use the blade to push myself backwards, and you learn that as the more times you get stuck, you learn these techniques to get yourself out, putting wood underneath the tracks, somehow, you know, using a winch system with chains. I understand all that. But what I'm saying is, if I would not have had that tractor with me on the property, then I would have had to call in some favors from friends that had bigger equipment, or from friends that had knowledge, which happened one time. I called my buddy Matt from WRM Excavators, and I said, hey, can you bring this excavator over here? And, you know, how much would you charge me to bring an excavator over here to dig this thing out? And he was like, well, you're not going to like the price I give you. And I was like, oh man, my goodness, you know. But it turns out he came over here as an experienced operator and was like, oh, you know what, dude, you're not stuck. And he was able to manipulate. And again, knowledge is power, right? And experience is the best teacher. But he was able to get it out where I could not. And I spent a couple hours digging. Now, I always joke around. I joke around with him and be like, well, I got it loose for you, right? As, you know, sometimes you tell your wife that when she breaks open a jar for you or something. But, you know, so he was able to get it out. But the one time that we used our tractor, I was glad I had it. So make sure you have another piece of equipment on the property to pull the dozer out with, to do the cleanup work. Now, because this thing is going to make a mess. I'm telling you, you're going to have, it's going to look like a bomb went off on your property. So having that box blade, having that land plane, having that bucket, having that grapple, all that's going to come into play while you're doing work on the dozers, depending on the job you're doing. But if you're clearing lot, you know, if you're doing some type of site work and you're taking off trees to make a smooth pad, or you're clearing a trail through the woods, which we've done, then you're going to need that type of other equipment to kind of go in tandem with the bulldozer. And I think that that's important. So you need to consider that. And if you don't own a piece of equipment on your property and you think, well, I'll get me a bulldozer and get all this work done, well, eventually you're going to have to rent another piece of equipment like a mini excavator or a tractor, or call a buddy with a tractor over to help kind of do the cleanup work or the finishing work. So that's 2 lessons that I've learned so far by having this rental dozer. Let's talk about lesson number 3. Sure is nice and sunny today, ain't it? That wasn't always the case. So I rented this bulldozer for the month of February, 28 days in February, or 27 maybe this year, I can't remember. But anyway, nonetheless, 20-something days, right? So I said, okay, I'm going to get a lot of work done on this thing. I'm going to take Sundays off so I can go to church, relax a little bit, no big deal. And of the first 22 days I had this dozer, it rained 16 days. So the lesson that I learned was look at the weather forecast. It was unbelievable the amount of rain that we had. And you're like, well, you can work in the rain. Well, no, you can't. Well, you can, but it stinks, right? There's so much mud. I talked about in the last lesson learned that I got the dozer stuck like 47 times. Well, that's the reason why, was because my land is so wet and muddy and sloppy, and I just couldn't get any work done. And there's been quite, if you've been following this series, you've seen me talk about the low water crossing that we, I use that term loosely, by the way, the road that we tried to repair where the water was coming over our road, and some of the other projects that we've done, digging ditches and stuff. Well, it's hard to dig roads in the mud, and it just didn't work out very well for us. And so that was a big foul on my part for not looking at the weather, a big overview, God's eye view of the month-long forecast for the month of February. Remember when I talked about in lessons learned, I didn't put that many hours on this tractor? Well, that's because of the weather. I'm going to turn this tractor in tomorrow, and that's going to have about 80 hours on it. That's it, 80 hours in a month. So you do the math, you know, you got $4,800 at 80 hours. How much did that cost me? And we're going to talk more about that in a minute. But the thing about it is I could have got those 160 hours worth of work done if it hadn't have been for the weather. You know, it was just frustrating. Every day you'd walk out, and then you'd have like one day of nice sunshine weather. You go down there and you start pushing around stuff, and the ground was still wet because it hadn't had time to dry up yet. And it was just frustrating, you know. The cool thing about it, though, is when I talked to the company, we had some conversations about the weather and things like that, which takes me to my next lesson learned. But before we move into our next lesson learned, if you would like to support our channel, we put links below in the description of the video. We put our Amazon link, we put our workwear link, you can save 15%, stuff like that. If you want to go check that kind of stuff out, any purchases you make and we receive a small commission from, 100% of it goes back into the channel. We buy fuel, we buy supplies, we buy all kind of things to keep the channel running. So if you're looking for a way to support the channel, just use those affiliate links. We'd appreciate it. That helps us out a lot. It doesn't cost you anything extra. All right, so let me talk about the 4th lesson learned. The 4th lesson learned is rent from a reputable company. We went with H&E Equipment Services out of Dothan, Alabama. Now, they're a national chain. From what I understand, I think he told me they had 120 stores. So that's a lot of stores across the nation to rent equipment from. And the cool thing about it was, you know, he understood, he's in our local area, so he knows what the weather was going to be and all this good stuff. So he was like, look, man, if you need a couple days on the backside, we can work something out for you. Maybe you saw the video of us having to replace the hydraulic line. They came right out, I mean, like the next day and replaced it. And then we busted another one 10 minutes later, and they turned around and came right back out and fixed it again. I included the insurance with the rental fee, so it didn't cost me anything extra, and they didn't give me a hard time about it. And, you know, fixing these kind of hoses on the front here, that ain't cheap. And it takes time, you know. He had to pull off some panels and things like that. So rent from a reputable company. I called another kind of like local company. It's like John's Rentals or something, whatever, you know, Tom's Rental Company. They asked us what kind of work we were going to do. It's like, hey, we're going to go down close to the swamp and all. They're like, no, we don't want you doing that. And so they didn't even, they were like, we don't want you in the swamp with our equipment. But H&E was like, hey, listen, go to work with this thing. And they've been real responsive. So the thing about us is we don't need the extra days. We got all our work done. A month was a long time to rent. You can get a lot of work done in a month. It's crazy. They offered more days on the backside of the contract to account for the days that we missed due to weather. But fortunately, we got all the work done. But the thing about it is, we renting from a reputable company is what my lesson learned was. But this thought just came into my mind. It was for 2 weeks rental, it was like $4,100. For a month, it was $4,800. So that's why I got it for a month. So, consider that as well. If you want to save $700 or whatever, maybe you just want to rent it. But I just thought, just adding the $700 for an extra 2 weeks, I get more work done. Well, you can get a lot of work done, especially if you get a tractor or a dozer from a reputable company that's in good shape. Like I say, nothing happened with the dozer. I just tore a hose off of it. So the equipment was in good shape. The customer service was awesome. They were real responsive. The damage insurance was part of the contract price, so I didn't have to pay to fix the hose. So when you're look for a reputable company. And that will take me to my next lesson learned. What kind of land are you going to be working on? When I looked at my land, I walked it. I knew that I had swamp on my property. I mean, I know that, all right? I was like, okay, well, I'll just dodge the swamp area. I'll go around, and I wanted to make a perimeter road around the property. But what happened was I can't get through the swamp with this bulldozer. Now, you probably could with an excavator and more equipment, bringing in dirt. There's ways around that. But I didn't have the time or resources to do that. But I was thinking to myself, I'll just go up to the swamp, kind of go around the swamp, and then back around, kind of make a little dog leg around the swamp area. No problem. Well, the swamp just don't start and stop. And that's where my foolishness came in, I guess you'd say, where I was like, well, I'll just go up to it. You may not have to get close to the swamp to start sinking. So not knowing how soft my dirt was, not knowing how low the water table was. I don't know. Is that a water table? Maybe, I guess. I don't know how you would say it, but like literally you would see water start coming up from behind, underneath the ground when you would ride in on your tracks after you dug 6-8 inches, whatever the case may be. So I don't really know the technical term for that, but when you see water coming up out of the ground, you're getting close to the swamp, right? Or you've hit your water table or whatever. So I'm like, man, not knowing my land and not waiting for it to be dry enough to work on. That was a huge lesson learned for me. I was like, man, I could have got so much more done. It's probably, it's kind of a catch-22 because I got all the work done, but it's a little messier than I wanted it to be. I feel like I could have got more clean work done if the ground was harder and drier. Is that true or not? I don't know. I just feel that way. So I don't know, but that was a lesson learned for me, is not knowing just exactly how soft and how wet my land was before I started putting this, 30,000 pound dozer on it. I don't know how much it weighs, but super heavy dozer on it, and seeing what a big mess that made. So that was the 5 lessons learned, but I do have a bonus lesson learned for you. And that is to have a plan of what you're going to do with it and be ready to deviate from it. Plans are just something to deviate from, is what we used to say in the military. My plan was, okay, I'm going to go over here. I'm going to make this perimeter road around the property. It's going to be awesome. I'm going to drive my truck around it, my golf cart. It's going to be beautiful. If I buy horses, I'm going to buy, I can take my horses around it. It's going to be the most amazing project ever. Nah. When you hit the land, when you hit the muck and you hit the dirt and all this stuff, you're like, oh, okay, we got time to deviate, right? So I just started pushing out some underbrush and stuff like that. So I had the plan, but I deviated from it. And then I started pushing over all this stuff that you see here used to be underbrush and things like that. And now it's where I can at least get my bush hog down in here. And the more we travel it and the more we get down in here to do work, further back, it's getting more messy. It's getting sloppier. And so, I don't know. Renting a dozer is messy. Renting a dozer is super, super messy if you're going to rent it in the middle of the rainy season and you're getting mud everywhere. But the lesson learned was to make sure that you have a plan and make sure that you can deviate from that plan if need be. because it's important that even though we didn't put as many hours on the tractor as we had hoped, could have maybe put more on it if we would have stuck to a solid plan, or the plan that we had laid out was attainable, because it just was not. But anyway, that's my bonus lesson learned, is to have a plan and to stick to it, or at least have an off ramp and deviate from, and knowing what you're going to do if that plan fails. Plan B, as they say. I hope it helped you, because it's a fun time to rent a dozer. It's a lot of learning. It's really, really cool to get to it, because I had no experience on this. I mean, literally I had about 20 minutes worth of driving a dozer before I rented one. So don't be scared of it. Treat it with respect and treat it with cautious, be safe with it, but don't be afraid of it, you know, because you can get in there and you get a lot of work done even if you don't know what you're doing. If you're just pushing trees over, just go for it. You know, if you're clearing land, just go for it. And now if you're going to do something that's going to have some finesse or whatever, you might want to call in someone that knows what they're doing. But anyway, go have fun with it, but consider, should you rent or should you hire someone? That's probably the biggest question that you should ask yourself before you rent a dozer. And then all those other lessons learned are just factors to consider. But should you rent or should you hire someone out? Those are big questions. So hey, thanks a lot for watching the video. We appreciate you guys. God bless. We'll catch you on the next one.